Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another great podcast. And always, we have the best guests and the best audience on the Chris Voss Show. So we certainly appreciate you as our audience tuning in each and every time for all the cool things that we always have and great stories and stuff. People on the Chris Voss Show podcast. Be sure to tell your friends, neighbors, relatives, dogs, cats, mistresses, pool boys. Get them involved in the show. Be sure to share the word. We certainly appreciate it. You can tell them to go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification button. Go to iTunes and Google Play where you can download the show and subscribe to it there. You can, of course, get it through most of the major podcast apps as well that you take and like. I've got a really exciting guest that I'm very interested in talking about. I saw him speak a lot at South by Southwest and got a chance to get to meet him and everything else. These guys are really brilliant when it comes to the area of Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, the token business we'll get into. Chris Snook, he's the best-selling author of Digital Sense, and he's the chairman and founder of the World Tokenomic Forum. We're going to get into that, what that is and what that means. And welcome to the show, Chris. We're glad to have you. I'm
glad to be here. Thanks for making time.
Yeah, thanks for, it was fun to watch you guys. You guys did a lot of great interviews with a lot of interesting people at South by Southwest, and it was really awesome. We were at Rich Snodgrass's place that he had there at South by Southwest, and man, between all the food that he dished out and the bread bot machine that was in the back, and you guys were sitting down, there was Michael Leob and Gary Vee showed up. Just lots of great people that came, and you guys did a lot of different panels and stuff. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was a fun. I mean, so we had started at about 6 weeks earlier. World Tokenomic Forum and Reg and Bonin had come together and talked about doing something, and we called it Blockhouse, and we kind of took the lead on curating a 3-day thing, and then Reg and Loeb and those guys came in and stepped in, and you know, we ended up doing a much larger collaboration than it was originally intended, and I think you know, the results were everybody had a blast. But it was 3 days of what I would like to call 10 pounds of sausage in a 5-pound bag for sure. So you know, we had some great crowds though. It was a invitation only, kind of free but curated event, and we had a myriad of content across blockchain, brands, direct, digital, all kinds of stuff. So it was.
It's kind of interesting you mentioned 10 pounds of sausage. That's actually my porn name. So, sure what that has to do with cryptocurrency. But tell us about the World Tokenomic Forum. Give us some plugs so people can look you up on the interwebs as we go through this.
Yeah. So pretty much everything on any app that is social media that doesn't steal your data, because I'm deleting those. I am at Chris J Snook, CHRIS, the letter J SNOOK. Most active on LinkedIn and Twitter and Telegram these days. A little bit of WhatsApp, some WeChat in between, and whatever else I get sucked into today. And then worldtokenomicforum.com, and tokenomic is TOKENOMIC. So like economic, but tokenomic. So that's where you can find us and where you can learn about us. And World Tokenomic Forum is a membership consortium. We're basically an organization that has realized one of our core values is, if you want a seat at the table, build the table, and then invite people to it. And I think we live in an interesting time that most of your listeners are well aware of, in the sense that rapidly, you know, there are new economic leaders being forged, not just with cryptocurrencies, but just in general. And this is happening at a pace that is unprecedented. We've seen that pace accelerate over the last decade specifically. I mean, we all know, you know, the Instagram versus Kodak stories and the things like that. But, you know, we're now doubling beyond that. And when you think about the implications of that, there's a lot more questions than there are answers right now. And I think, you know, one of the important things is, you know, with all the hype and with all the things that are good or bad about hype cycles, what World Tokenomic Forum is trying to set out to do is create a through point that takes us through the next 50 years and says, okay, there's new possibilities, there's old legacy infrastructure, there's old paradigms, and there's new problems. And if we're going to solve these, if we're going to have a chance to solve them fast enough, We've got to start collaborating, and we've got to build bridges, not walls. And that doesn't mean you can't put walls around yourself. It just means you should probably have a bridge somewhere too. So we can talk more about that in a second. But that's the high-level overview. And we've got a membership consortium that's invitation only, and it spans the early-stage technology leaders to government regulators to industry enterprise leaders. And we kind of shape this conversation where we put deals together and we put conversations together that can allow us to come up with the best answers that serve all humanity.
And it looks like on your guys' website, you guys have explanations of your purpose, your vision, the mission of what you guys are trying to accomplish, talking about the community. And so you've got this whole membership forum where people can come together. Looks like you also have like an annual event, an annual summit, if you will, in the Grand Cayman Islands. That can't be bad.
We're kind of focused on making Cayman the next Davos. And so for those familiar with that model, or if you're familiar with the Milken Institute in Beverly Hills, the Cayman is actually the 5th largest banking center in the world. And it's also kind of got this mystique around it. But the reality is that they've got some really exciting things happening down there as it relates to scaling up technology, protecting IP, and distributing things around the world. And one of those, one of our first industry partner members at World Tokenomic Forum was Cayman Enterprise City, and they're building about 1.5 million square foot campus with 5 parks. And I mean, it's like a Googleplex, but on an island. And they have, a derivatives and fund park. They have a media park. They have a tech city, which is housing a blockchain and internet related businesses. They have life sciences park, and then maritime. And so there's a really, and they've got first world infrastructure down there because of the banking and the things like that. And they're pretty hurricane proof. They get hit once every 15 years versus every 15 months. And so there's some interesting things about Cayman. Obviously, if you're going to hold an event, I like warm weather versus cold weather. So, I can appreciate Davos, but I want to do something somewhere cold. So our annual summit is where we convene our members, and it's invitation only to be a member. And then if you're a member, you can then attend the summit. And the summit is really about a couple things. One is shaping the agenda of what are the themes. So this year's themes were cybersecurity, identity, payments, infrastructure, and social impact. So what are the themes that we're going to look for technologies in, and then help to commercialize them with big brother, big sister, enterprise buyers, partners, or investors. And over the course of the next year, what will happen is we'll shape new agendas. What are the problems that we face that we need to get after right away? How can we collaborate and through co-opetition start to solve some of those problems in sustainable ways? And those themes will get shaped by our members and our industry partners moving forward. And then we have our initiative called Sandcastle, which you probably see on that site. And Sandcastle is where we do a really fun kind of head-to-head battle, tournament-style pitch competition. But the purpose of that is to find technologies in those themes and then bring the top 16, which is what we're doing this year, down to Cayman, all expenses paid except for their airfare, to compete in front of the membership and ultimately then do deals and business development with them and for them and pair them up with each other and with people and with capital. So Sandcastle is kind of our platform for pipeline filtering of new and early stage development that we can share with the world and with our industry members and partners.
It was interesting. I came up through, owning brick and mortar companies, and we had several of them back in the day. And then the recession came and wiped a lot of it out, especially our large mortgage company. And in doing so, I had to learn a new gig, and on top of everything I had always been doing in the horrible worst recession that we were in. And that's when I got into social media, and I just kind of found that I could get on Twitter and, promote some of my websites, try and save my companies from the recession, and people would click on them. I'm like, hey, this is a great game. And so I just learned to game social media, and then people started recognizing it and whatever. I just kind of salesman CEO knew what to do to market myself. And everywhere I've ever gone, in fact, I remember when the first Crush came in, where everybody and their dog was a social media expert. And what's really surprised me when I went to South by was how hot. I mean, I knew that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and the blockchain were hot. But I really didn't realize how hot it was till this year when I went to South by, and like everybody I met was a cryptocurrency expert. I was like, wow, okay, I guess this social media expert thing is out.
Yeah. Well, and I think, it's a good I mean, so I'll frame it a different way, because there's the positives of that kind of thing are whenever you have something, whether it's social media or whether it's internet back in the late 90s, right? When you have something exciting that is inherently disruptive to whatever the status quo is, then you get all kinds of people entering it. You get people that are transitioning out of business that no longer is viable, meaning like, you were a talented business guy, but your business model got disrupted by macro forces that were somewhat out of your control. And so you got to eat, and you go, well, what's low cost and what can I do that's next where I can not only maybe grow my revenues and net worth, but also just friggin' survive. And so you get that. And then you also get the people that kind of have the pattern recognition of other major shifts, and they come in and they enter it and they look at it from a protocol and a platform level, and they realize that this is a window of opportunity to maybe end run the powers that be and become part of the new establishment.
Yeah.
And so I think, you saw that happen with everybody from, Zuck to, Airbnb to Uber to things like that, right? There was this end run that could happen because of Web 2.0, and they were smart enough and timed it well enough where they could see it and they could execute on it. And then you have shifts that happen every couple hundred years, and we're in one of those. Mm-hmm. And so what's different is you get all those same dynamics that you get in these 10 and 15 year cycles and shifts, but then you get amplification around it. And I say that because the mistake that, what we're trying to help all of us avoid is, with all the hype, what's good is you bring talent, you bring capital, and you bring people into a vertical that otherwise we're doing something else, because quite frankly, it looks and is more lucrative in the short run. Mm-hmm. And when you do that and you go through that hype cycle, which we're in right now, and then it falls out into the trough of disillusionment, which it's coming very soon, those people still tend to stay, the players, the real ones, right?
Yeah.
And so why that matters is because had you not had the hype cycle, you wouldn't have brought the talent into the vertical, so that when the trough of disillusionment happens, the real stuff can get built or amplified when all the noise falls away, goes broke, and decides to go back to whatever they knew. And so you kind of need both. And at the same time, we're at a very tender time in tokenomics and in blockchain specifically, because it's so fundamentally disruptive to how everything organizes. And that's not like hype. That's just reality.
Yeah.
It's so disruptive at a core that it will be fought, and it's kind of one of those things like it screws a lot of people's business and lunch up that are happy to stay in control and sit on top of the rest of us, and they don't have to move unless they have to move. And so right now, what we could all do is we could chase the when Lambo crap, and we could chase all that, and we could end up hurting ourselves and the broader segment of possibility, simply because we get too close to the short term and we don't think about what's actually really happening. And what's happening is a better way, more efficient way of not only doing business, but a more transparent way, a more equitable way, a more cooperative way, without losing our ability to compete and have meritocracy, a more inclusive way to decentralize economic development and decentralize opportunity. And that has not been possible before. And so that's why you see the excitement from the people that get it, or the people that are in their 60s and have energy still and go, I've not seen anything like this, but I understand what's here. And I also understand how fragile it is and how undefined it is at this stage. So let's not pretend that we're experts. Let's not pretend that we know. Let's get really curious really fast.
Yeah. In fact, we had more sponsors this year than ever before at South by, and I'm sure that the sponsors will flow into NAB, Collision, and some of the other ones I'm doing. But we have more sponsors that were blockchain-oriented startups, or sometimes not startups. Like we had one sponsor that was a lawyer firm that I guess is fairly well established, and they're trying to utilize the blockchain for doc prep and court interactions. And then I know at your guys's one of your panels, there was another gentleman that was aware of or had built something similar, or had built sort of a law sort of model that they have that can be just plugged in. And so it was really cool to see all the different stuff that's coming out now and what's available. I'm excited for it because, a lot of people don't understand monetary policy, central banks. They don't understand all that stuff that you learn when you're trained to be a stockbroker, like I did when I was young. And so they don't kind of understand how all those different factors, the economy, the Federal Reserve, the rate, and a lot of people should read more about what the Federal Reserve is and what it's about. But, one thing you brought up is there's a great opportunity right now, but it's also disruptive to the controls of people that, hold their territory and actually do have an impact on all of us when it comes to monetary policy and the quality of our lives. And this is a grand democratization of money and monetary policy. And it's disruptive because, governments are run based upon their central banks and their Federal Reserves. And of course, we manipulate our interest rates or print money at our central bank, and we can affect economies around the world, sometimes shutting them down. And this new thing with cryptocurrency makes it so that it's democratized. It becomes borderless. You can't go, well, it doesn't go through our Malaysian central bank and this central bank. And of course, they've tried to contain some of that, but a lot of it seems to have failed miserably now. And they're just, I forget the twin brothers' names that sued Zuck years ago, but they're evidently doing really well, setting up exchanges, legitimizing, if you will, the whole integration of people that still want to control it, like the SEC and stuff. It's just an amazing thing.
Let's educate the audience a little bit on, and when I say educate, I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence. I mean, for the sake of some terminologies that get thrown around quite loosely by all different parties and that can be quite confusing, right? There's, if we just base it to what is currency and what is money, most people that you meet don't know the difference, and they think that currency is money, and it's not, right? So if I hold up this dollar bill, right, most people say, give me some money. If I hold up this dirham that I just got last week in Dubai, right, then most say, give me some dirham or give me some money. These are fiat currencies. So these are currencies, which means inherently they're made out of thin air. They're arbitrarily and then they're enforced by essentially armies and rule of law, right? Mm-hmm. And so why that's important is that they're not any more real. So there's nothing real about that dollar. It costs 6 cents to make that dollar. It costs 6 cents to make one that says 100, right? So when I give you a $100 bill versus a dollar bill, it actually costs the Federal Reserve the same to print it. So it's inherently worthless. The only reason it has any value is because of the trust that it can be redeemed for what it's got on its, thing. So in first world countries like America, where we forget, and we've been the reserve currency of the world forever, we have this protection that's currently in place around the stability of our dollar, right? But if you look at the value of our dollar, it's gone down every year for the last 100 years, dramatically, right? And that's because inherently it's worthless. Like when we print it, it's not worth anything. There's nothing backing it since 1971 when we went off the gold standard. So the only thing backing it is an $800 billion a year defense budget. So when people like Jamie Dimon months back and everything else said Bitcoin isn't real, it pissed everybody off, right? And he did it on purpose so that he could short the market and he could get his friends in and all that stuff, right? But the point is that Jamie Dimon's not wrong, right? It's no more real than that. The reason what makes it real is it's enforced by code. So instead of an army enforcing it, it's enforced by code. And so the possibility is if we can start to understand what cryptocurrencies are versus fiat currencies are, then you have to go, well, what's a token, right? Because that's a different thing altogether, right? Cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies are nothing more than ledger balances. That's all they are, is a ledger balance. You can't invest in a ledger balance. You can speculate in a ledger balance. And this is a big point of confusion, because when people get pissed off and say, well, they're against crypto or they're against this. What most people don't realize is that it's not that they're against it or not. It's that they realize maybe that speculation is different than investing. And when you speak about investing in cryptocurrencies, you're speaking ignorantly, because you can't invest in something that's not real, that's just a ledger balance. You can merely speculate it's going to go up or go down. And that's fine. So there's a lot of money to be made speculating in currencies of all kinds, as you know, as a stockbroker. Now let's talk about money. Money is something real. Money is something that has a store of value. Now, at some point and rapidly, I believe Bitcoin has the opportunity, and maybe a couple others, to become a store of value, or there will be something like it, either by a sovereign government or someone else. The IMF's trying to do special drawing rights, cryptos, China's trying to do what they're doing with their WorldCoin thing. And so everyone right now is trying to come up with an asset-backed crypto, and sovereigns are trying to come up with a sovereign-backed crypto to beat the other sovereigns to it, so that there is a reserve crypto that could be used for exchange as a store of value, i.e. digital money. And again, I'm not trying to bore anybody here, but these are big differences.
That's a great explanation that you've given. I mean, that really explains it to people, because they really do see money as a hard, valuable object. And they don't, I think Tony Robbins used to say it best. He's like, it's pieces of paper with printed dead people on it that's green. That's really all money is.
If we're not going to talk about the lack of scalability or transferability of gold, right? But if you just think about gold is a store of value, right? Regardless of what people's opinion of it today is a store of value, it's a store of value. And we know that because for the last thousands of years, 4,000 some odd years, or however far back we can go in recorded history, an ounce of gold in any period of time was basically enough to buy a formal men's suit or 3,000 loaves of bread. So I don't know what gold's trading at today, but it's probably trading somewhere around $1,400 or $1,300. Well, that's a pretty nice men's formal suit, right? It's not a $3,000 or $4,000 one, but it's also not something you bought at Men's Warehouse on the sale rack, right? So the point is that if you think about that, for 4,000 years, that's been the case. So there's a real stability. There's a real underlying value to that. It'll buy you about 3,000 loaves of bread. Now, it may not be organic bread-bought bread, right? But it's bread that you can put in your stomach and eat. So when we talk about a digital gold or a Bitcoin being a store of value, we're talking about, will it mature and will it be sustainable enough to be used like gold, but in a much more fungible and immutable ledger kind of way, and transferable. And it does bring down borders. And the reason why central banks don't like it is right now central banks control 82% of the world's gold. So they have no problem if you digitize gold, because they control the underlying asset. What they don't control is the Bitcoin code. So until they can control enough Bitcoin holdings, they're going to fight Bitcoin, but they may or may not have the choice. Now, I'm not trying to say that those guys are 100% wrong. I do think there are bad implications, like the military-industrial complex, that come from central bank economics. But we have to work with these different parties that are realizing that if they truly want to put their money where their mouth is, and not just be the elitist that, Bilderberg group that just basically shuts everybody down, if they want to create a true shared prosperity and really make the world a better place, then they can participate. If they don't, this new table is being set, and they might not get invited to it. And so what we're trying to do is open the door and calm people down so that they can have these conversations and try and not vehemently oppose one another, realizing that some people are just flat out for themselves, and that's always going to be part of humanity. But there are people on both sides of this equation that want the same thing. They're just looking at it through a different perspective. And we're delusional enough to believe that we can build, and we've been attracting those people. So we think that we can build a discourse and a platform by which those conversations will happen. And as they do, then this thing moves forward in a much more sustainable way for all of us. And innovators can innovate, and policymakers can assist and support and do their job, which is to govern, not control. So
yeah, and that's the beauty of the cryptocurrencies, is the democratization of it. I mean, it's beyond borders, it's beyond central banks, and like you say, they're just going to have to join up and roll with it. And yeah, they're losing control, which is good. I mean, the more we move to an information society where, information is democratized, it used to be that, smartness and books and certain things that you would learn would be hidden between, high pay scales that you would have, paywalls that you'd have to go through to get them, colleges, etc. And now we're seeing, where the more people have access to data, more information they can get. Of course, across the World Wide Web was one of the deliverers of that. It's pretty interesting. So with the forum, you've got an annual thing. I notice here you've got, it spans 20 countries, and the membership is a consortium of highly selective and invitation only with peer review membership. So you really got to be somebody to get into this thing.
No, well, yes and no. So you have to be someone who aligns with the core values, number one. And you've got to bring something to the table. You've got to be willing to contribute. You're going to receive far more than you contribute, but it comes back to things like a doerocracy and things like a give first. One of the core values is practice generosity in every interaction. Like what you have to be is you have to be the right person for our culture. We're not the only ones that are going to do things. We're certainly not pretending like we need to be or even want to be. We're just going to do them in a way that is true to what we believe is noble and right and in integrity. And we're attracting, and we want to continue to attract people that share those beliefs and respect those that don't, but just not do business with them or just not interact with them. I have no challenge with the people that want to do it a different way or see it a different way. That's the point. We live in a free society, or we all endeavor to. We live in a time where data integrity is now possible. We've had data consumption and data be the new oil, and the Cambridge Analytica exposure is one of first of many that realizes, wow, the power of blockchain is not just in currencies, which is why I wanted to clarify what currencies are versus tokens, right? Tokens are as old as English common law. It's a contract to take delivery of something at a future date, right? So in a token economy, all we're talking about is everything physical will be and it already is being digitally secured in a contract. Now, on a blockchain, that can be stored as a smart contract or as a smart token. And then that token can have a value and be transacted with on an exchange, right? Where I could have 1 million barrels of oil that I tokenize and I show provenance to across the entire supply chain, right? And using IoT devices and things like that, I can sense where there's something wrong, where there's fraud, where there's whatever in real time. And with AI, I can flag that. And so when you think about the possibilities of these other layers of technology sitting on top of a storage medium that allows for immutable ledger and a shared distribution of that distributed ledger technology, sharing that data, increasing cost efficiencies, what that means now is that your silo and my silo don't have to spend time reconciling, which is 90% of the cost of time and money. We can see it in real time. I can say, am I holding a chapstick in my hand? And you don't have to trust me. Right, that's what a shared, multi-chain architecture, distributed ledger technology can do. Well, in data integrity, beyond just currencies, right, we're talking about being sovereign to ourselves, being able to port our identity where we actually own it and control it across whatever border we want. Well, the governments win there too, because now they can verify in real time, am I actually Chris? Is this really him? Is he an AML, KYC verified investor or buyer, or is he a scumbag, right? Like, those kind of things. So this is the possibility of a token economy. And all we're trying to say with our membership is we want to be very thoughtful and slow with how we roll it out. This is not about big 1,000-person crypto events. There's one a day in one country around this world on those right now. And ultimately those will consolidate down over the next couple of years, because all the startups that are buying sponsorships, as you said earlier, to fund their ICO will either have funded their ICO or the market will crash and they'll be out of the sponsoring to fund my ICO business. And so then the businesses that are relying on that sponsor dollar and can't find enterprise sponsor dollar will stop doing events. And there'll be a handful of events left and the right people will go to those. We support people doing that. That's not us, right? What we're going to do is we're going to build a membership that actually sets agenda and then looks to provide proof points through the way of deals that manifest and change economies. And so when you say, well, look at that company over there, what we want is a attribution that says, wow, that founder was one of the sandcastle competitors in whatever year. And wow, Honeywell or Renault Nissan or whatever enterprise that bought that or that scaled that or added their sensors to it. They were an industry partner of World Tokenomic Forum. And the capital provider that put money into that in the seed round or in the mezzanine round, they were a member of, so that we can say, look, we're making a difference. That problem we addressed, we went out and tried to solve it, but we didn't solve it as ourselves. We went and we organized people that were also committed to solving it and that had economic interest in solving it, and we did it in a sustainable way, and now there's the proof point. That's what we're building. Mm-hmm. So, and the annual summit's just where we convene those and we set those. So we'll scale it to 1,000 people over the next 8 years. And we've done that so that it can stay not controlled, but that it can stay very thoughtful about, who's in that and how active those members are versus just, using it as something on their LinkedIn resume.
Mm-hmm. Are you guys just hosting the annual summit in the Cayman Islands, or are you guys anticipating using that as a centralizing geographical location?
Right now we're committed for the next several years, and I don't see why we wouldn't. But future is the future. You never know what's going to happen. Sure. Right now we're trying to create a known thing on the calendar for our members that they can organize around. So this year, May 8th to 10th, in a couple of weeks, we will have our annual summit in Cayman. In 2019, it will move to October 8th through 10th, and then it'll be like that second week of October every year thereafter. October is a great time of year, not only for our annual summit because it doesn't compete with a lot of other things that our members may be at. It's also a great time of year in Cayman. It's after the tourist season and before the next tourist season. And so it's something that we can kind of anchor, and then as we scale it, it becomes a time of year where our members and our presence in Cayman kind of has a Davos type feel. So that's the plan as of now. As far as how we operate around the world, we collaborate. We're picking these, and we've been experimenting. South by Southwest was an experiment, right? And we learned a lot from it. It was a very positive experiment. We learned a lot from it. And so we're in discussions with a couple different well-known platforms and organizations that want to collaborate on a, them plus World Tokenomic Forum presents multi-city enterprise DLT tour, where we're talking about blockchain, AI, IoT as it relates to, different industries, whether it be healthcare, finance, whatever. So we're in discussions with that, and we'll probably pick, one or two collaborative things that we do this year where we co-produce a more public event. And by public meaning, like, you don't have to be a member to attend it. We'll go out, and part of that is that's how we become aware of potential future members, and that's also how people can experience us without having to go through some, hurdle first. So we're being thoughtful about that, and we will be doing something between June and next year, probably in about 6 different cities with a major known entity that's in the space, and so. I'll be in Estonia all summer. We'll be opening up that market. So we're active around the world, but our annual summit is kind of one time a year, and it's in Cayman.
Cool. Now, it's kind of interesting what's going on with what I'm seeing with cryptocurrency and the blockchain as well. One of my friends, Brock Pierce, is trying to turn Costa Rica into blockchain capital of some type or something. He's down there doing he's kind of turned into an interesting fellow with the way he dresses, which is cool. But it's kind of interesting to me. I know that my friend Michael Harrington, who just launched an XRP fund, he was looking at a lot of states like Latvia and some of those European countries. And this is really kind of interesting Wild West where everything's opening up and there's just huge opportunities, a huge upside, and no one really knows where things are going. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, me just trying to keep up with all the new coins and currency is like, I don't know, I've lost track now.
And I will tell you that, this business, meaning like, if you want to just talk about the industry of anything related to blockchain or crypto right now, there's a running joke with people that I've run into on planes or in places. A month in this world feels like a year or 2 years in any other industry. And part of that is because like yesterday, right? Yesterday, India decides, we're banning it all. Now, that may be temporary, more than likely is because they're a democracy, but it may be temporary or maybe longer term. But, stuff like that happens overnight. Now, all of a sudden, like entire, industry players have to reorganize. The exchanges get shut off. It's weird. And at the same time, then you have a company, or you have like what you just mentioned that, Brock and some other people are doing. You have people that are going, let me find a country that is got less to lose or maybe more to gain, and that's a little more nimble and wants to be innovative, and let me go set it up in Malta, Gibraltar, whatever. How does that scale? I don't know that it scales, but what I do think it does is it provides a fluidity where, because we live in an age of mobility and everyone has $1,000 computer in the palm of their hand all the time, and we check it every 6 seconds when we're not on a webinar, right? Or sometimes even when we are on a webinar, the portability of the entrepreneurial lifestyle is facilitating this now too. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I ultimately think a lot of these countries of crypto experiments will fail, not in the sense of where they won't get established, but they'll fail to deliver the scale that we have in the West, or even in China or in the East, as far as where you could actually build a company and put 1,000 people in it and have it operate, right? Because it's going to be pretty hard to put 1,000 developers or people in Gibraltar. It sounds great if you're the founder and you want to be a digital nomad to live there. Great, good for you, but you're not going to create the next company there. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't have distributed talent, but that's a whole different that's a whole different operating model that there's not a ton of really large scale success cases of to model. So again, beautiful opportunity for white space and greenfield for someone to crack that code and create the new, good to great for a distributed workforce. I think all those things are going to happen, but that means that there'll be a lot of blood on the street, and that's the beauty of innovation, right? Is that we incent people to take risk. The people that are willing to take that risk know that they're more likely than not to fail, but they're not going to quit, and they'll just move on to the next thing. And I think that's exciting. I just think that we have to be thoughtful about it. If we're America, if we're China, if we're Canada, if we're these bigger countries, right? We can't just do a wait and see, and at the same time, we don't want to overregulate, right? Because a lot of this, we don't know what we have yet.
Yeah.
We think we know a little bit, but that's because we're ignorant. The more we dive into this stuff, the more we realize we don't really know what we have yet. The possibility here is bigger than what we know, but it's not clear how we get from, B and C to P and Q.
Yeah.
And we've got to create structures where we can be free to innovate and fail and make mistakes and maybe have people, inadvertently, I don't want to say get hurt, but have things happen that we would not want to repeat.
Yeah.
And I think that's what small countries can do. I think smaller countries are seeing that, and they're realizing that the cost of failure for them is lower because they're not in the G20. And this is a chance to maybe, if they crack the code, leap ahead and all of a sudden be running the G20.
Yeah. Yeah. We certainly saw that with Russia. There was a while there where we're just like, Russia's a failed state and in a recessionary depression sort of economy. People are still in line for bread, and screw those guys. We can forget about them. And now they've roared back to being.
There's nobody you can forget. I mean, there's nobody you can forget about, and we can't pretend for a minute. We're both sitting here in America. We can't pretend for a minute that that we're not vulnerable. And beyond, I'm not talking about vulnerable to a downturn in the Dow the other day where, oh my God, it went down, 3,000 points in the last couple of months, and it was down 500 at the open and up 1.5% at the end of the day. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about full on, no one pegs to our dollar anymore.
Yeah.
That will happen. That will happen. Now, I don't know when it's going to happen, but it will happen probably in the next 5 to 7 years. And when that happens, what my hope is and what we're trying to help do, and I think this is where even the central bankers recognize the need and why they're not necessarily pro Bitcoin, but why they are always saying the underlying technology of blockchain is interesting. Why they're saying that soundbite is because they understand the real power of this, which is if we don't rapidly come up with a non-fiat currency model that can work for underlying assets and trade around the world interoperably, then if we don't whenever we cannot prop up this everything bubble that we live in right now, which is a great book people should read if they haven't, by Graham Summers. the everything bubble will wake you up. The American Jubilee will wake you up, which is by Porter Stansberry, I think. Google those two books. They're recent. They're really good ones. That they're easy to read and easy to digest, and they will scare the piss out of you in a very, get active kind of way. But they don't talk about crypto at all. They just talk about the current unsustainability of our financial system. And America has to realize that we can't pretend like we're the America we were at the end of the World War. We are coming into a new cycle where the next crisis period will culminate somewhere around 2020, 2025. And, Neil Howe and William Strauss wrote a great book called The Fourth Turning back in 97 that talks all about this. That's coming. We're 7 years away from it. And when it happens, the institutions of the last 100 years that have been built will be crumbled down and new institutions will be built. Now, some of the players will remain. Some of the people that built the old ones will generationally build the new ones. But there'll be new players too. And that's what you're seeing right now. So the next 5 to 7 years is going to be rocky. I'm hoping that we can get some real prosperity going in the crypto world so that we have less people feeling desperate and nothing to lose, shooting up schools and doing other unfortunate things, because it will get scarier before it gets happier. And so my hope for all humanity is that we get educated, that we understand that consumption and this consumerism, it's over, right? It doesn't mean you can't like nice stuff, but we have to start consuming knowledge and empathy and things that actually matter with the same veracity that we chase Lamborghinis and bullshit.
Yeah. And the interesting part of it all, that with the blockchain being able to be utilized for so many different things, I never understood this. I still complain to this day as to why it is someone can send me money instantly across PayPal or some other app. But when I want to transfer money to my bank, from one bank to another, or from PayPal to my bank, or my bank to PayPal, it takes 2 to 3 business days. And I'm just like, why are we in this world? And when Michael Arrington launched his fund for XRP, I was reading about Ripple and XRP and how it utilizes the blockchain. And I guess one of the targets they've used for it is the banking model and helping transfer money. And one of the things I read about was that one of the reasons I have this pain of it taking 2 to 3 days to transfer money between banks is that there's some organization and control, and they are just hardcore. We control everything. We make the rules. They're super slow at dragging their feet at changing anything or updating to any new technology, and they hold this chokehold on the transfer of money around the world, whatever this committee or organization is. So the beauty of this, what blockchain can give to banks and other companies, is that it can save them money, and of course they can manage inventories, and they can just do so much more. And they don't have to run through these control organizations that are slowing everything down and controlling everything to a point of choking it almost to death. Whenever somebody tells me still to this day that they're going to send me a check, I just want to go, what the hell's going on? I get a check? Seriously? And yeah, the future cometh, and whoever doesn't lead will end up following. So it's good that you guys have that going on. I noticed too, you guys announced in February that you have you guys launched a revolutionary social enterprise venture fund for blockchain related technologies.
Yeah. So the way that we're doing that is that Sandcastle, the initiative, right, that we talked about earlier, where we're kind of vetting startups from around the world. We had this cycle. We looked at 137 different companies the last 12 weeks leading up to the announcement that comes out actually on Monday. We'll be dropping the final competitors brackets and lists that are coming down to Cayman. But we went through 130. We found 137 companies that applied, that went through a 2-step process that we did diligence on, everything from their white paper to any of the code they may have had or whatever. And then we found 37 that we felt like were actually, I don't want to say real, but like they had built something. We'll leave it at that, where it wasn't just a white paper, wasn't just something that we're gonna do. And then out of those 37, we seeded 22, which means that we felt like 22 were actually really qualified and had some incredible traction, enough where we would feel comfortable bringing them down and putting them on a public stage in front of our members, and also sharing that via social media after the fact, and kind of and saying these are companies you should look at. And then out of those 22, 6 are alternates, and 16 became the Sweet 16. Well, how the model works is the social enterprise fund, so Sandcastle Social Enterprise Fund, as it takes token and or equity in any of those companies as they emerge moving forward as a separate business, as it takes token equity or cap table equity in those things, when it harvests those tokens or when it harvests that equity on success, 20 to 40% of the carried interest will go back into social enterprises in the ecosystems where those companies came out of. And so the vision there is right now we don't have a limited partner model like a typical VC. So we don't have that 2 to 20% model where you have a management fee and carried interest. We operate the fund off of the cash flows that the World Tokenomic Forum membership generates. So we don't need a management fee. We don't need outside capital because we don't want to force limited partnerships, which are typically pension funds, things like that, to think about, well, a portion of my carried interest profits are going to go to something that doesn't make me money, right? Mm-hmm. So it's an experiment, but the idea is that I don't need $1 billion for myself, right? So it's not that I don't want to make $1 billion; it's just I don't need it. And I'd argue that most people don't need it, but I encourage everybody to go get it so that you could do something good with it. And so what we're trying to model is a new model for venture investment that shows how a token economy creates different reductions of risk to early stage investment because of the liquidity provided by exchange trading when it's done right. And so as we harvest those returns, we're committing a minimum of 20% of that carried interest into social enterprises. We've selected 5 so far, and over the next 24 months, we will find another, whatever that is, 19 organizations, 15 organizations. So we'll end up with 20. And then the idea being each organization will get 1% of that carried interest profit on an annualized basis moving forward once we've identified 20. So Startup AZ is one, GBF out of India is another, JSIE, which is the incubator on Jindal out of Delhi is another. We're working with Digital Chamber as another benefactor out of DC, and then DigiCity is the 5th. And so as we continue to move around the world and we find these nonprofits that are not only advancing shift in these different verticals, but also providing feedback loops and onboarding loops of new technologies or incubated companies, we want to reinvest in those markets so they can continue to find the next great thing in their economic system. So that's the idea. It's an experiment, and we're excited about it. And if it works well, great. If it works somewhat well, we did something better than, again, buy 15 or 20 different Lambos with the profits.
And that's how these business models work. I mean, people need to realize that. I mean, we went through a society of brick and mortar and mom and pop Main Street, and then things, siloed up into Walmarts and now Amazon. And there's just this continual eating your own lunch in our societies and economies there's a bit of a Wild West period, and out of that seems to come some different things, and then of course it escalates from there. I remember when there was a whole mess of Facebook killers and Facebook copies, and MySpace. Everyone was fighting to become the thing, and of course, out of it came Facebook and things like that. And I'm sure there's going to be something that's going to churn that out, bury it, and come up with something new from that. And so I think cryptocurrency is in that same place where there's all this activity going on. There's fighting with regulation and control, of course, with the powers that be. And I remember when social media went through, especially during the Arab Spring, they went through this thing where the Arab countries were finding that social media was overthrowing their governments. They were trying to control it. They were trying to do all sorts of stuff. They could shut off cellular systems, et cetera, et cetera. This is just one of those things that has to happen. We're going to go through that with automation and jobs that are going to be lost by automation, but then also jobs that are going to be added because of the technology that's going to have to be maintained to create that automation, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if there'll be jobs for everybody. One question that comes up: do you think that with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, is it, it might be a few years before it silos up to where there's, I suppose maybe some major large players. Do you see that bringing more stability to the economies of the world where we don't have these recessions and depressions and crashes and all that sort of good stuff? And this is, of course, several years in the future.
I don't know how. I don't know that I think that what will happen is, we're currently on our fourth central bank in the United States since we founded ourselves. Most people don't realize we've had four because all they know is the Fed. And most people, I mean, not necessarily your listeners, but most people that you talk to think the Federal Reserve is a federal agency, right? They don't realize it's not even owned by our government.
Central banks aren't. And
so I don't know that you're going to see a world where there's no central banks. I don't think that's highly likely. I really don't. I'm not saying it wouldn't be good. I also just think, it's not likely. And I don't know that it's necessary. What I do believe is that there will be an end to this current version of central banks, that depending on where a cryptocurrency type replacement is, a decentralized monetary solution is, and that's a big depends. Depending on where that is, it may be possible to not have to replace the fourth version, which is the Fed and any of its derivatives that are around the world like it, with another one right away. But that's a big TBD. So it's certainly possible. And again, I think what is important is that we understand the implications of both, right?
Yeah.
So the implications are right now, everyone's jumping in and speculating, thinking they're investing because it's the only place they can get money. Like if you really think about the macro forces, Chris, the macro forces are 60% of the pyramid of people in let's just say the United States. 60% of the people in our population financially are worse off than they were a generation before, right? So the middle class, we can say whether it exists or not. It exists because we're feeding them with credit card debt, student loan debt, and things like that are allowing them to feel more prosperous, but they're also feeling the overwhelm and the load of debt that they can't expunge. And so 60% of this population is doing far worse. The top 1% of this population is doing exponentially better than they've ever done. And instead of getting into well, that's wrong or, hate them, instead of getting into that, what we really need to understand is what's the danger? Why are some of the regulators that are talking about, banning cryptocurrency trading or whatever, why are they, I don't want to say right, but why are they concerned? They're concerned because in some way what they understand is that when you have 60% of the population that's desperate for opportunity because their wage growth has not gone up at all since the 70s, but their cost of living has gone up 3-4x and productivity has gone up exponentially, and they're sitting there in their own level of understanding going, everything says more productive, everything's more efficient, I'm broker than ever, and stuff's more expensive, I'm pissed. And then here comes Ripple going from $1 to $3 in a month. And guess what? I want to get rich. I'm tired of waiting. I don't know how else to do it. I can't get a third job, right? So what happens is you get a lot of people that are just pent up that will invest in it, but they don't know what they're buying. They don't even know what they're buying. So when it starts to crash, right, they punch out. And so they're buying high, selling low. And that is a risk to the systemic underlying fundamentals of our society. It's not that crypto or Bitcoin or blockchain is wrong. It's that we don't understand at mass, we don't understand the implications of what we're doing. And when it's easy, everyone wants to do it. And when it's hard, everyone bails out. And then they blame whoever they blame and they look for someone to hang. And so that's a good way to get elected. So, I mean, you have these macro forces that are real. And I think, the message is like, we just have to get smarter, and we have to hope that what we can create is enough success early where we buy ourselves time. Because here's the last piece I'll say, and I'll shut up on this, is that like when you talk about Facebook killers and we're predicting the death of Facebook or we're predicting that, look, that's a foregone conclusion. Zuck knows that, right? Everyone knows that. The difference is we can't, they're not going to die tomorrow, right? Like everyone's like, I'm leaving Facebook. And when he, testifies in a couple of days or whatever, there'll be a bunch of to-do about everyone's leaving Facebook. And some people will delete their accounts. The statistics show a lot less people delete their account than actually say they will already, right? So I think that's going to continue. But even if everyone that says they're going to delete their account, the ecosystem that is dependent on Facebook for their own needs is so entrenched that it's not going to disappear overnight. However, there's a thing that Gerd Leonhardt, who's a really smart friend of mine that I don't see very often, and I've only spoken to about 3 or 4 times, but he's one of those people when you get older, you go, my friends are the people that I learn from, that I spend time with, and whenever I do, I get a lot of value, and they get a lot of value. So Gerd's out of Switzerland and a phenomenal futurist, and he's got this thing he calls slowly then suddenly. And that's what we have to start thinking about. Every business we run, every business we work for, and every business we consume from right now is slowly then suddenly going out of business or becoming the next Facebook, right? Amazon is slowly then suddenly either going to continue to dominate or have their lunch eaten. And it's not going to be obvious because it's not going to happen like this. It's going to look like this and then that. And it's going to look like this and then that. And so the next replacement of Amazon Marketplace or Facebook or whatever, right, is going to look like this. And it's probably going to be blockchain developed. But it's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be 1 year. But when it happens, it'll be overnight.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in the era where U.S. Steel was everything. And, yeah, everybody you knew went to a plant to work. And, U.S. Steel was one of the biggest company on the Dow and the biggest performer on the Dow. And then one day they filed bankruptcy.
Yes. You've probably seen the Brave browser, right? Here's a perfect recent example. Brave, which is by Mozilla, right, they have the basic attention token. They've got this browser that is super fast, right? It loads super fast. Page load speeds are exponentially higher than Chrome, and because we don't track you and all this stuff. So I downloaded it because I'm excited. I'm like, man, that's awesome. I want a browser that, doesn't have my data tracked, doesn't do that. I downloaded it. I can't use the damn thing. Now I can't because none of the websites out there were built for it yet.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't anything you want to actually go to because it's so cookified to death, because that's been the last 10 years of social, right? We've cookified everything that nothing loads. So the whole point is that, yeah, it loads fast, but it loads like the one little graphic up here that doesn't have a pixel in it, right? And then you can't buy shit. You can't do anything on the browser. So you end up wasting time if you're trying to actually get through your day using this as your default browser. Now, I'm ultimately supportive of them, and I'll continue to endorse them. It's more about the fact that until the ecosystem of websites builds so that it can operate seamlessly on a Brave type browser, the user experience sucks. And while the user experience sucks, it's going to be hard for that thing to get traction. Now, once the ecosystem hits some level of tipping point and more websites than not that are popular are integrated to the Brave browser, and you don't get tracked on there, but it's like a one push publish. And if I'm a company that wants my stuff trackable on Chrome, but I don't want to lose the Brave consumer, then I have like multivariate. Once I have that at some level of tipping point, then yes, all of a sudden Chrome and Safari and everybody are out of business, like instantly. But until then, we're not going to see it.
Yeah.
So, this is the state of the industry right now. These solutions are right. But they're early, and they're going to need massive adoption of the ecosystem around them before users can truly benefit from them. But it'll happen more rapidly than it has in historical business cycles. So it's not going to take a decade. It might take 5 years, right? It might not take 20 years. It might take 7 years. So it's coming, but we're early.
Yeah, but you got to lead or follow when it comes down to it.
Right.
And one of the things I've always talked about over the years is when I was growing up, I grew up dirt poor, and I was stupid, but somehow I had the wherewithal that I knew that I was stupid. And so that I knew I needed to learn to be smarter, at least educate myself with knowledge. And I realized early on in the age that I grew up in, the 80s and early 90s, there were 3 pillars that I needed to get into if I wanted to make big money. One was banking, another was real estate, and the other was investing in the stock market and stuff. And it's always been sad to me that people aren't taught more about currency, about monetary policy, M1, M2. They aren't taught about central banks, how the whole thing works. And you talk to people, they go, well, trading in Bitcoin and investing in the currency is risky, and they don't understand that that's what the stock market does every day. That's what people do with T-bills on the stock market. A lot of their 401ks are maybe investing in either T-bills or investing in the currencies that are out there in the marketplaces, all the different currencies around the world and stuff. And it's really sad to me that in our education of schools, we don't teach children about this stuff so they can understand how their world is working, why they get interest rates given to them that fluctuate and go up and down. I remember when we had a mortgage company for about 20 years. Sometimes trying to explain to somebody why the Fed increased the rate by a quarter point today. I remember there was a couple years I went where I predicted what Alan Greenspan was going to do in his meetings and predicted the increases for a while there, and how the rates can fluctuate up and down, and how that really impacts their lives, and what they're paying for goods with import and export with the things at Walmart. In fact, one of the jokes we've been having around here, I think I got it from Bill Maher. He says, I can't wait till the Trump voter walks into the Walmart after this trade war and sees all the shelves are empty. But I went through the period with our mortgage company where one thing we learned about mortgages was a lot of people and a lot of governments invest in America because the mortgage was the one product that was like guaranteed not to default. It was one of the best investment products in the world, even better than the currency for the American government. And they were selling these derivatives, the strips, and all these countries were buying our mortgage assets and the investments in the mortgages. And I remember when the market tanked, and at the time, the mortgage business got wiped out by these idiots that were running these things in New York, where I forget what they're called. But they just come up with all these new rules that in the mortgage business we knew would bankrupt you, and they did them anyway, hedge funds. And what was interesting to me was I started consulting for some banks after that. And I remember I wandered into one of the banks in Santa Monica that I was consulting with, and they used the term jingle mail with me. And they go, we got more bags today, jingle mail. I'm like, what the hell is jingle mail? And they go, what's happening is the mortgage crisis has gotten so bad, people are just fucking mailing their keys in and just saying, screw you, here's the keys. It's your problem now. I'm out of here. Have fun with that. And it became a very real thing where when they would bring in the bags of the mail, they would jingle because they were full of so many keys of so many people going, screw you, here's the keys, have fun with that. And I talked to the banks at that point where we'd reached for a long time, we'd had this investment sort of arena where people would default on their credit cards, they would default on their cars, but you always had to have a place to sleep at night. So the whole principle of international currencies and people investing in this American product of the American mortgage as an investment vehicle was on the principle that very few people default on their mortgages. Well, what was interesting with that crash we had was the switch flipped. People were keeping their consumer credit cards, they were keeping their Land Rovers and expensive Mercedes, but they were saying screw the housing. And so housing went from being this really core investment and really core asset, and actually something that was a lot of economies were based around the world on investing in, to where it became disposable for the very first time, where it used to be credit cards and cars were disposable. And that, of course, brought us to a standstill, almost the greatest depression we ever had. And of course, it affected a lot of other economies, like Europe was with their retirees were investing in that product. And so once that product crashed, and you brought this up earlier, in where we invest in this consumer society where we consume goods and we're buying debt and everything else. And so I'm hoping that in the future with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and stuff, they can, once they get stabilized and there becomes kind of the powers that be, if you will, that that maybe we can not have this craziness, this upendiness of economies around the world, where if one central bank sneezes, some little Africa company or country goes under.
Well, right now, I mean, again, right now, and it's not the doomsday side. It's just the pragmatic side of how I'm organizing our business, my life, and why we're on purpose right now, why we're trying to bring these conversations to bear and bring people's education levels up and encourage them to do it, is there will be a worse one. I mean, I don't know when, and I hope it's further out than 3 years, but there has not been a true deleveraging that is normal even after 08. If you really think about it and you really look at the math, we've kind of put the last house of cards up, right? We've now made money the U.S. bond, and what that means is you can't have any deflation at all in the price of these underlying securities, which are bonds, without having a massive crisis. In the everything bubble, Graham Summers talks about, in 2008 we had a 3% deflation of our mortgage bonds and our bills, 3%. If you think about how bad the 2008 financial crash was,
yeah,
we only saw deflation of 3%. So why do you have the faux prosperity that everyone thinks is a recovery? Why do you have it right now? Because we can't see any deflation at all and not have something worse than what we had in 08. And so that'll scare the hell out of you when you realize that how much more can stuff go up, right? And then when you think about other macro forces, and these are way down rabbit holes we don't have time or need to get into now, but people might want to Google the grand solar minimum. I geeked out on this for about an hour and a half about 2 months ago, which is something that China fundamentally believes in. Now, whether or not it's true or not, I can't verify because I'm not a scientist, but the grand solar minimum is this 400-year cycle of orbit that the Earth goes around the sun in, and it lasts for about 40 years. And apparently in 2018 or late 2017, we kind of entered that trajectory. And all it means is that when you look at weather patterns, you have to look back 400 years. So we have to look back to somewhere around 1600 to understand what the next 40-year weather patterns are going to be. Historically, the short version, it gets colder. Now, global warming aside, which there's plenty of data to prove, that the Earth's getting hotter, regardless of whether we think it's carbons or just time, the Earth's getting hotter. That still doesn't impact the fact that during a grand solar minimum, it's colder than normal. So it offsets it a little bit, but it doesn't offset it a lot. Why is that important? Well, because everything above the 40th parallel freezes more than it should, right? And so when you think about even this winter, it's kind of been a weird winter. New York's gotten snow, like it's still snowing in like Minnesota and Chicago. It's April, and it's like really cold and big snow. So whether that's just a weird off anomaly storm or whether the grand solar minimum is right, China believes it is. Well, why does that matter? Because China's economy obviously matters. China has had thousands of years of history that it's documented where every major dynasty that has ever fallen in China, meaning gotten replaced, a coup, whatever it is, happened during a 40-year period where there was a grand solar minimum.
Wow.
Now, that's an interesting factoid if you think about crypto. If you look at the flares on the sun, this is the chart that blew me away. The flares on the sun and their increase over the grand solar minimum and the lead up to it map almost look like a stock chart or a price chart of cryptocurrencies the last 12 months. Why is that interesting? Well, China is working on ways to commoditize and tokenize all of their, meaning smart contract, tokenize and ICO all of their state-run commodities. Why? Because if half your country freezes and 40%, during a 40-year period, more than it normally does, and crops get destroyed because of that freezing, you have 1.5 billion people that can't eat. Well, if they can't eat what they normally want to eat, what happens to food prices? Food prices go through the roof. Well, food prices aren't a nice to have. They're a must have.
Mm-hmm.
So if your wage growth is whatever it is, and you have 1.5 billion people that now all of a sudden are facing 2, 3, 4x on loaves of bread and stuff like that, right? You have a real problem. Well, that problem does sneeze across the world, right? Now, this trade war about soybeans and everything and what they did the other day, bottom line is that they're going to have soybeans from somewhere.
Yeah.
So yes, maybe it's a leverage thing, maybe it's whatever. I don't know enough to know that. All I know is that if they believe, and they do, China believes, doesn't matter what the rest of the world believes, even if they're wrong, they believe this because every major dynasty they've had has fallen during a grand solar minimum. So they're preparing for a cryptocurrency model that they can do that's state run, so that when they launch 100 ICOs, they're tokenizing their grain, their corn, their soybean. Well, why does that matter? Because if I buy that contract today at $1 and it floats on an exchange and it goes up to $4 or $5 or $10, and then any of this happens and it goes to $12, what I at least have done is created capitalization, right, for consumption I don't need personally. So now I've speculated as an owner of that ICO in a Chinese-backed asset, right, that is now trading 10x what it was worth because of scarcity or just pure speculation. I can at least use that capital when the fiat capital has been debased to go restart my local economies, right? And so there are real implications of how tokenomics and thinking that way can save us from the next crash, but it's not going to prevent the next crash.
You know, I've often thought about what the future would be like. I have this fantasy that in the future we'll all live under one flag of being human, kind of the John Lennon Imagine song, if you will. Yep. And that we'll be using hopefully higher extensions of our brains. I'm not sure I'm getting faith anymore on it, but it's a fantasy. But you know, we live in this world where there's no hard labor anymore. You know, that we have robots and automation to do the hard labor, and we hopefully at that point would become a more enlightened society, brain-wise, and use more of our brain. And I've often thought, well, okay, so what do we do for work? What do we do for money? What are the trades and goods that we trade? And, you know, you make me think that maybe in the future, that's what we'll be doing. We'll be investing in a lot of these things and speculating, and maybe that's how we'll make our living. It will be basically venture funding each other and investing in all these different things out there. I don't know.
Well, I think that there's again, there's a lot of new models, and we have to think and divorce ourselves of the incremental model that got us here, right? Mm-hmm. We got to depolarize, and that's going to be the hardest thing, right? Is like we have so much overwhelm that Rebecca Costa wrote another great book called The Watchman's Rattle back in 2011, which basically talks about what happens when human beings invent complexity far out of the ability to deal with it from an evolutionary biology standpoint, right? And Diamandis is talking about this too, right? We don't get an upgrade every 50,000 years, like and computers double every 6 to 10 months. It's like what the super memes are that show up in society are things like gridlock, things like replacing fact with belief, irrational correlations. What I just said about grand solar minimum and the solar flare chart and the price of Bitcoin, that's an irrational correlation. I say it for impact because I'm saying it to say that China seems to be preparing and thinking about this. But I'm not saying that those two things are related, right? Because an irrational correlation is irresponsible. I'm just saying that those two things looked alike. But if we make it more than that, then that's an irrational correlation, and we do that in society. And right now we have the people that are just, I voted this way and I voted that way, and like every decision we make is based on that identity of not only who we voted for, but whatever paradigm we're operating under. And none of it gets us to what you just said, not even close, right? Yeah. And I do think there is a balance. I share your fantasy in a different way. I do believe, right, in building bridges, not walls. The reason why is because bridges drive revenues. Walls are an expense, right? Both respect and secure sovereignty. So a bridge provides you the ability to stop someone from coming over it or toll them for coming over it, in which case it becomes more sustainable. And yet at the same time, it offsets its maintenance costs with that expense, with that revenue. Whereas a wall immediately throws up arms because it basically says keep out, right? Leave me alone. So it creates this immediately. And the other thing it does is it gets graffitied and there's no revenue system for it. So it's just an expense, right? And again, this isn't a stab at one political party or not. This is not a stab at people that want walls. This is a explanation of you need both.
Yeah.
But what you really need to understand is the impact to a human of everything we do or don't do or say or don't say. And if we can empathize with the fact that none of us, the one thing we say, I was just in Dubai, I was in the Middle East, I've been in Europe, I've been in Asia, I live here, right? That's the beauty of this space, is that you're traveling a lot more and you're all over the place. I have not been somewhere yet where a parent doesn't love their child and want more for them than they had for themselves. I have not met that person yet. Right now, I know there's evil people out there, and I know that, there's all that. What I'm saying is that at a mass level, we all want the same things. And so, we just have to start educating and talking to ourselves about our humanity, but then pragmatically run our businesses different, invest in things differently, consume with more thought, consciously decide whether we actually really need that fifth whatever it is, or that trip to IKEA, right? Like, do we actually really need that?
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where we go with all this stuff. But yeah, it's an exciting prospect. There's a lot of people worrying about automation and if that's going to take away jobs and what jobs we left, and driverless cars and all this different technology. But hopefully it will bring us to a bigger humanity, bigger society, more of a one world. I know there's people that are afraid of that because they have biases, but ultimately that's really what we need to come down to.
That's the beauty of. I know we're winding up here, but that's the beauty of what you said earlier when you said, you said something to the effect of, a lot of people don't understand M1, M2, things like that. I think that's the beauty, again, of the hype cycle, right? We've talked about what the negatives are, but one of the things that's been good about the hype cycle around crypto is, on their own, right, more people, because they've had to figure out how to secure their wallet or are becoming aware of how much of their data might be out there, right? There's been a groundswell of awareness around my data, not just because it came from Analytica, but prior to that, right? And crypto's part of that. There's been a much more, I think, mass level adoption, even though crypto investments are less than 1% of the U.S. population. It's still the hype cycle around it, the awareness of it is causing people to start to look into, or maybe listen to, or think about things like money, like currency, like just things that they normally wouldn't go read. And I think that that's good because it's opened up the awareness. And, awareness is the key, right? We can never outperform our current level of awareness. And our comfort zone is nothing more than the boundary line around our current level of awareness, right? It's what we know and what we know we don't know. And the thing that's the opportunity, the new opportunity, whether it's the utopian fantasy that you share, that the world operates that way under this humanity kind of thing. Well, that's a new opportunity somewhere outside your and my current level of awareness, which is our comfort zone. So the only way we can get to those new opportunities collectively and individually is to every day try and grow and step outside of our comfort zone a little bit without tearing a hamstring in the analogy, right? Don't stay where you are. Push your boundaries forward. Learn something new each day. And then as a collective, what happens is our overall awareness improves, and then new opportunities all of a sudden appear and we can act on them. And that's the thing that gets me out of bed every morning, is just trying to lead by that example, and then collect a bunch of people that are doing that as well, and have fun conversations with them and do stuff. So I appreciate, all the time that your listeners have given us. It's been a long show, and I appreciate your opportunity to be on it. But that's my closing thought.
Sounds good, Chris. And it was wonderful to meet you and get to know you at South by, and I'll look forward to being a friend for you for a long time to come. Give us your plugs one more time so people can look them up.
Yeah, personally, you can find me on social at Chris J. Snook, and then worldtokenomicforum.com.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris, for coming on the show. We certainly appreciate, of course, you, our audience. Please share the show. We have the best audience in the world and the best guests. We have all the best guests. So please share it with all your friends, neighbors, dogs, cats, mistresses, pool boys. Share it with everybody. Tell them to download the show, subscribe to the show. They can go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification so you can take and make sure you get notifications on your mobile device for the show. You go to iTunes, Google Play, and of course you can download the show, subscribe to it, I think, on just about any major podcast app out there. Thanks for Chris for being on the show, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.